It's December 10th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the arrest warrant being sought for the ex-defense minister over the martial law declaration. Prosecutors have requested an arrest warrant for Kim Yong-hyun to investigate him as a key suspect who proposed martial law to President Yoon Suk-yeol. He has already been summoned 3 times for questioning on treason, abuse of power, and other charges. And the Justice Ministry imposed a travel ban on President Yoon over the botched martial law order. It's the first time a sitting South Korean leader has been barred from leaving the country. South Korean author Han Kang will be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature over in Stockholm. We're covering all the achievements and festivities live tonight. Prosecutors and the police and the Corruption Investigation Office have been speeding up the investigation process for the allegations around the martial law declaration. We start with the arrest warrant for the ex-defense minister. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
South Korean prosecutors have issued an arrest warrant for former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun. The prosecution special investigative team stated that Kim's charges include colluding with treason and abuse of power over his alleged role in President Yoon Suk-yeol's brief declaration of martial law. Kim is accused of being responsible for proposing the declaration of the martial law decree, the banning of all political activities, as well as the deployment of troops at the National Assembly. Prosecutors added that issuing of warrants comes amid concerns that Kim may attempt to flee or tamper with evidence, given that he changed his mobile phone after the martial law announcement. After Kim had voluntarily appeared at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office on Sunday, he underwent several hours of questioning by prosecutors across 3 sessions over the past 2 days. Kim reportedly claims that though all martial law troops performed under his instructions, the martial law declaration did not violate the Constitution. Seoul Central District Court will now have a warrant review hearing starting on Tuesday afternoon to determine whether Kim is to be arrested. The police special investigation team planned to soon question others in connection with the martial law declaration. Former Minister of Public Administration Lee Sang-min, former commander of the Defense Counterintelligence Command Lieutenant General Yeo In-hyung, and former commander of the Capital Defense Command Lee Jin-woo have been notified that they will be summoned by the team, though the specific dates are yet to be scheduled. This comes a day after an emergency travel ban was placed on them as the police pledged to investigate the decision process behind the martial law declaration. Though the police have also summoned Commander Yeo, his spokesperson said that he has been summoned by the prosecutor's office for questioning on Tuesday. The police special investigation team also announced on Tuesday that it has issued a travel ban for the Police Commissioner General and Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency Commissioner and National Assembly Guard Commander. The team had also requested data regarding the deployment status of individual soldiers from the Defense Counterintelligence Command, Capital Defense Command, and other related organizations from which the troops were deployed from. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol is also under a travel ban with divided calls and opinions on when and how the end of his term should come out. In the meantime, Yoon and his chief of staff appear to be remaining silent. Our Oh Soo-young has more.
Silence ensues at the presidential office, while fiery debates blaze all around it on when and how to relieve President Yoon Suk-yeol from his role. His order to impose and retract martial law shocked the country and the world last week, stirring nationwide calls for his impeachment or resignation. Since making an apology to the public on Saturday, the leader has stayed mum and is believed to be staying put in his official residence in Yongsan-gu district. His chief of staff Chung Jin-seok and his aides are reporting to work daily, but have also refrained from making public appearances. Secretaries and administrative officers have been working solely within their offices, avoiding contact with reporters. While Yoon said he will entrust state affairs to the ruling People Power Party and the government, he has not commented on their united push for his early resignation. The Prime Minister and the ruling party would like to avoid an impeachment, which would impede the functioning of government and potentially favour the main opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung upon a snap presidential election. Some in the ruling party suggest calling an election within the next 6 months, based on the 5.5 months it took to call an election after former President Park Geun-hye was impeached 8 years ago. Others have proposed holding an earlier election in the spring in a so-called cherry blossom election. However, those considered as being in the pro-Yoon faction are calling for a constitutional amendment to shorten the presidential term from 5 years. This could take months of partisan negotiations and a referendum process. The Democratic Party is currently rejecting the ruling party's call for a so-called orderly resignation and has threatened to vote on an impeachment motion every week. With investigations over possible treason and abuse of power, the president has become the nation's first incumbent leader to face a ban on overseas travel. As clashes continue over when and how to pull the plug on the Yoon administration, the top office is on borrowed time and is likely to be preparing for various investigations. For the time being, it seems there will not be an official statement by the troubled administration, its fate sealed and its future out of its hands. 오수영, Arirang News.
And Parliament is working non-stop to deal with the mass turmoil in the political arena. A special counsel bill to investigate treason charges against President Yoon will be voted on during today's plenary session. Our correspondent Shin-young tells us more.
Lawmakers will discuss and vote on an opposition proposed bill on Tuesday to appoint a permanent special counsel to investigate treason charges against President Yoon Suk-yeol over his martial law declaration at the National Assembly on the final day of the 22nd Parliament's first 100-day regular session. This follows the passing of the bill by the Assembly's Legislation and Judiciary Committee on Monday through a unilateral push by the opposition. President Yoon, former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun, and Army Chief of Staff General Park Han-soo are included on the list of those subject to the investigation. Prime Minister Han Duk-soo, former Defense Counterintelligence Commander Yeo In-young, as well as the ruling People Power Party's former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho were also added to the list. If passed, a candidate recommendation committee can be formed immediately, as the president cannot veto a bill for a permanent special counsel, unlike a regular special counsel investigation. However, delays could arise as the president's refusal to appoint a special prosecutor would not carry penalties, and assembling a new investigative team could take months. The opposition Democratic Party is also pushing to pass its version of the budget on Tuesday, which cuts 4.1 trillion Korean won, or around $3 billion from the government's original 677.4 trillion won plan. It was unilaterally approved by DP members of the National Assembly Special Committee on Budget and Accounts at the end of November. The party is even reviewing passing an additional cut of 700 billion won, or around $500 million, primarily targeting the salaries of presidential officials. It emphasized that they would not engage in any negotiations on the budget unless President Yoon is impeached. The same day, the Assembly's National Defense Committee is holding a session to conduct an inquiry into the case of the declaration of martial law. It aims to look into details including the deployment of troops to the National Assembly and Election Commission and plans to arrest key politicians. In the meantime, the PPP has decided to elect a new floor leader on Thursday. The party began accepting candidate registration at 9 a.m. This comes after former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho offered to resign on Saturday, taking responsibility for the situation and his absence during the vote on President Yoon's impeachment. Although he was re-endorsed by party members, he has maintained his decision to step down. Shin-young, Arirang News.
Amid the recent political upheaval, the government has pledged to implement market stabilization measures while closely monitoring the market. And during an emergency F4 meeting of top economic officials on Tuesday, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok and other officials suggested that though the volatility in financial and foreign exchange markets has increased, the concerns are a bit excessive considering the strength of the South Korean economy. They said stock markets have been seeing buying from institutions and foreign investors taking advantage of the low prices, so individual investors should remain at a calmer perspective. Now, the government further seeks to share its stabilization efforts through close cooperation with ambassadors in upcoming conferences to prevent recent political risks harming the country's credit rating. Top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan met on Monday for the first time since the failed impeachment vote against President Yoon. Despite the upheaval, the three sides say the trilateral cooperation against North Korean provocations remains solid. We are joined by VOA correspondent Jessica Stone this morning. Hello there, Jessica.
Good morning.
So let's start with how Washington is viewing the impeachment attempt and the efforts to maintain stability here on the Korean Peninsula in the light of the political turmoil.
Well, the promises that you outlined there that were made during the meetings between the nuclear envoys kind of ring hollow here in Washington because there was no advanced warning of the declaration of martial law, either to the U.S. military, much less to the U.S. political leaders and counterparts here in Washington. And so there is a feeling here that there is a disconnect. And we have seen a few of the major meetings that were supposed to take place between the Americans and the Koreans canceled, including the consultative group, the nuclear consultative group meetings here in Washington. Those have been canceled. And we also should point out that U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who is in the region, is going to Tokyo, but has canceled his plans to go to Seoul.
Well, then the question is, what does this gap in communication between Seoul and Washington mean for efforts to counter China in the region?
Well, VOA has been speaking to a number of analysts here in Washington who look at the U.S. Korea relationship very closely. And one of them from the Heritage Foundation, Bruce Klinger, told us this. He said the incoming U.S. administration will be focused on countering the multi-faced Chinese threat to the region. Yoon's actions, he says, will trigger doubts as to the viability of Seoul's roles and contributions. And one point we heard time after time from analysts was that coupled with the leadership changes in Japan, the feeling here in Washington by these analysts is that the two major allies that are part of the triad are less dependable, potentially, for the U.S. going forward when it comes to countering China. Several of those analysts also telling us that that Beijing wants a Democratic Party president to replace Yoon because they are, quote, more open to engaging China. And that when the incoming Trump administration comes, they do want to focus on countering China, taking a tougher stance. But of course, if Trump wants to engage directly with Kim Jong-un, as he has in the past, it will be easier, they believe, with the Democratic Party president in Seoul.
I see. Jessica, let's move on to what's happening over in the U.S. Trump's choice for defense secretary, that is former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, he's facing an uphill battle for Senate confirmation. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it seems to have turned in the last few days to a slightly more even path to confirmation, but it's still a path that is difficult to achieve. And one of the things that we've seen this week with Pete Hegseth is he's back on Capitol Hill. He's meeting with the senators who have to approve his confirmation. One of those senators in particular that he's courting is Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. She is a decorated military veteran herself, also a survivor of sexual assault and someone who is committed to ending sexual assault in the U.S. military. That's important because, of course, Hegseth is facing numerous claims that he engaged in sexual misconduct with women and that he has a drinking problem. And so after her meeting with him today, she told reporters, quote, I will be supporting Hegseth through the confirmation process and that he has committed to support her work to prevent sexual assaults in the rank. Donald Trump himself, meantime, has also expressed his support for Hegseth on Truth Social last Friday, saying that he was still backing him as a candidate, but he still has to get a hearing and he still has to get confirmed.
Right, and this all comes at a time of uncertainty, more, broadly about the impact of a change of leadership in Washington at the top, the incoming Trump administration. Now, I know you guys, VOA has been digging into the profile of Trump's nominee for a UN ambassador. Now, what can you tell us about Ellie Stefanik?
Yeah, so she is potentially an unlikely candidate for this position. She has very little foreign policy experience, and she's been 10 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. She's 40 years old. She began her career in northern New York as a moderate Republican at the age of 30. And she has really, though, in the last 6 months emerged as a very strong and vocal supporter of Israel. She was present in the hearings you see there in the hearings that the House held again with college presidents, talking to them about the anti-Semitic protests on their college campuses. And she really gained a lot of U.S. national attention during that period of time. She called for the resignation of some of those college presidents, and some of them ultimately did go on to resign. But She has also been a very strong supporter of Donald Trump. She made that move within the last 4 to 6 years. She went from being a moderate Republican to someone who supports the claims that he's made about winning the 2020 election. And she also came out in very clear favor of him during the impeachment trials, defending him extensively. But again, the major definer of her in the last couple of months, really on a foreign policy stage, is this stance on anti-Semitism. She's become someone who has spoken in May and at the Israeli Knesset and has vowed to back Israel. That's really helped her in this position, as well as in her own campaign. She's been a recipient of a lot of pro-Israel donors.
Alrighty, Jessica, thanks so much for the report today. We appreciate it as always.
You bet. Good to see you.
The outgoing Syrian Prime Minister agreed on Monday to transfer state power to the rebel group that ended the decades of al-Assad rule. Now, the end of the civil war in the country also saw a growing number of European countries suspend Syrian asylum applications. Lee Seung-jae reports.
A transfer of power is in the works in Syria after Bashar al-Assad fled the country following a successful takeover by a rebel group on Sunday. According to Reuters, the outgoing Syrian Prime Minister Mohammed Jalali agreed to transfer the power to the Salvation Government. The Salvation Government is an administration based in a small region of rebel-held territory in northwest Syria. While the handover could take days to finalize, the transitional authority would be led by Mohammed al-Bashir, who previously led the Salvation Government. Amid the collapse of the al-Assad regime and the start of a rebel administration, Washington wants to ensure that ISIS does not get a fresh start in the country and take control of Syria. According to U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan over the weekend, the U.S.'s top priority now is to ensure that ISIS does not receive new oxygen, adding that Washington will take steps by working with the Syrian Democratic Forces. Meanwhile, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said Monday that the former Syrian leader who escaped before the rebel takeover should be held accountable for various human rights violations committed during his rule. He added that not just al-Assad, but all those involved in human rights crimes during his rule should also be held accountable. Al-Assad in 2011 cracked down on anti-government protesters by ordering authorities to fire at the crowd. He's also accused of using chemical weapons against protesters. European countries are also putting asylum applications for Syrian refugees on hold until further notice. This includes countries like Austria, the UK, Germany, Sweden, and Norway, who announced Monday that they were suspending their application process after the ousting of al-Assad. Germany has the largest Syrian community in Europe with nearly 1 million. It opened its doors to a wave of Syrian refugees in 2015 during the height of the civil war. It also saw over 72,000 applications from Syrians being submitted this year alone. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Season 2 of the Netflix drama series Squid Game, which is scheduled to be released later this month, has been nominated in the Best Television Series Drama category at the Golden Globe Awards to be held in January. According to U.S. media reports, it is rare for a show that hasn't aired yet to be nominated. With all film and TV submissions due by November 4th and the final day for TV screening set at November 24th, it's speculated that only journalists affiliated with the award show were able to get an advanced screening for the second season. Now, the 82nd Golden Globe Awards will be held on January 5th. Today marks a historic moment as Korean author Han Kang will be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. But before these celebrations begin in Stockholm, let's walk through what to expect from tonight's grand event. Here is our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin reporting from Stockholm.
It's time to celebrate achievements and innovations. Today, December 10th, is Nobel Day, when this year's Nobel Prizes are awarded to the winners. Here's a preview of the big day. This is a Stockholm concert hall where the Nobel Prize award ceremony will begin at 4 p.m. local time. Each laureate will be honored with a presentation speech before receiving a diploma and a medal presented by Sweden's King Carl Gustaf. Korean author Han Gang, this year's Nobel laureate in literature, will take the stage fourth following the awards in physics, chemistry, and physiology or medicine. After the award ceremony will be the Nobel Prize banquet. Sometimes described as the world's most secretive dinner, the menu is kept tightly under wraps until the event begins. But here's a small hint from this year's chefs: porridge and apples.
In Sweden, we have a culture of produce grains, and I think it's really because it has a lot to do with tradition to serve porridge, and also the barley is hydrothermal treated, so the body can optimize more of the nutrition.
So the apple for me is a great symbol for knowledge and innovation. So it feels good to actually work with the apple for this kind of people. So it feels like it also symbolizes them in a way. And also we have had an amazing apple year this year in Sweden.
About 1,300 distinguished guests, including the laureates, the Swedish royal family, and government officials, will gather at Stockholm City Hall. The highlight of the evening will be the speeches of thanks delivered by one laureate from each category. Leading up to Nobel Day, Han Gang has had a busy Nobel week. She began with a visit to the Nobel Prize Museum, where she donated a teacup and a handwritten note detailing a routine while working on her latest book, We Do Not Part.
Step number 1, she would wake up at 5:30 every morning. She did not always succeed. Step 2 was she needed to take a walk every single day. And the third was to have a cup of tea from this teacup. And then afterwards she would look into the swirl, and that became her universe when she wrote the book.
Han's presence extends beyond the museum. She is also celebrated at the Nobel Week Lights Festival. The author is featured in 2 light installations, Leading Lights and De Auditon, which shine a spotlight on female laureates.
Her writing is it's poetic and also very social realism in a way, and that is really like a kind of inspiration for me in this artwork as well, to have something that is in a way magical, but also like focusing on human beings here and now.
Having passed its midway point, this year's Nobel Week is heading to its highlight, the Nobel Prize award ceremony and banquet. The 2 events will take place on Tuesday local time, starting with the award ceremony in the afternoon. 송유진, Arirang News, Stockholm.
With winter gradually setting in, the air is getting cold and dry. Morning lows were a couple of degrees higher than yesterday, but sharp winds are dragging down the feels-like temperatures. Afternoon highs today will climb higher than season norms, but it will get colder again as the week goes on. Meanwhile, the East Coast remains under dry weather alerts. East of Gangwon-do is under a dry weather warning. Strong winds and dry air mean a high risk of fire in the area, but thankfully wet conditions are in sight from tomorrow, which should help to ease the dryness in the air. The afternoon should feel more bearable under sunny skies in most parts, topping out at 7 degrees here in the capital, and Chuncheon, Daegu, Gyeongju will see a high of 10 degrees. Then we have frequent wintry weather in the forecast for the rest of the week, except in the capital area. Gangwon-do's rain tomorrow could turn to snow in mountainous regions with 2 to 7 centimeters in the forecast. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thanks so much for staying with us this morning. A new day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Korea time.